Shabbat Shalom. We Jews are known to be a worrisome people. We worry. It's what we do. In fact, we worry so much that one 20th century scholar actually called the Jews the ever-dying people. We're so worried about dying out as a people that he actually called us the ever-dying people, and in every generation we're constantly perpetuating this fear of dying out. In fact, we Jews are so worrisome. The story is told of 4 Europeans who were out in the desert. And sure enough, after several days, they ran out of food and they ran out of water. And they began to hallucinate. So sure enough, the British person says, "Oh, I'm so thirsty, I think I'll have some tea." The French person says, "I'm so thirsty, I think that I'll have some wine." The German person says, "I'm so thirsty, I think I'll have some beer." And sure enough, the Jew says, "I'm so thirsty, I must have diabetes." Similarly, Woody Allen has said that the Jews' favorite words are not "I love you." The Jews' favorite words are not "let's eat." The Jews' favorite words, "it's benign." We worry. We Jews worry. And so it's no surprise then when some freshman congresswoman from Minnesota tries to tackle policy with regard to Israel, but somehow can't seem to do it without uttering an anti-Semitic slur, that we worry. And we love the state of Israel. We love the state of Israel because it's the promised land promised us by God to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and their descendants. We love Israel because it's the startup nation and really from virtually nothing created this high-tech society dedicated to technology, dedicated to medicine. We love Israel because in so many ways it acts far above in the realms of morality. We love Israel for so many reasons. But when we hear an attack on Israel, we don't just think of all those reasons that we love it and therefore should defend it. We don't just think that because we're Americans we see Israel as a partner democracy in the Middle East, where gays have rights, where women have rights, and thus we have to defend it. But whenever we hear words of anti-Semitism tied into the question of Israel policy, our hearts and our minds go back 70 years to the Holocaust. And it triggers that fear within us. Because we Jews, we worry. We're afraid. We have anxiety. But we know what happens when things get really bad. And it's not just the Jews today who are worrying. It's not just the Jews who carry anxiety. Several years ago in 2014, a researcher began to see the anxiety and the fear that was really cropping up as a major phenomenon within our country, and he sought to document it. So sure enough, he did this massive study, and the university, Chapman University, published his research. And in 2014, so 5 years ago, the top 5 worries of the American people, not just the Jews, the top 5 worries of the American people. Number 5, public speaking. Not my fear. Number 4, being the victim of a mass or a random shooting. The number 3 fear of all Americans in 2014, safety on the internet. Number 2, becoming the victim of identity theft. And the number 1 fear of Americans in 2014, walking alone at night. Fast forward to 2018, the last time the study was done. What are the top 5 fears of Americans? Number 5, people I love becoming seriously ill. Number 4, not having enough money for the future. Number 3, pollution of drinking water. Number 2, pollution of the oceans, rivers, and lakes. And the number one fear of Americans in 2018? Corrupt government officials. We fear. And this fear has come to dominate so many aspects of our life. But fear is not new to our world. As I mentioned earlier, we Jews, we know from fear. We know from anxiety. And if you rewind to our Torah portion to today, Parashat P'kudei, and the completion of the book of Exodus, we see what happens when God recognizes our fears. Because what did our ancestors fear? They feared that there'd be no food or no water in the desert. They feared the Egyptians behind them, and they feared the nations that were in front of them. They feared the snakes, and they feared the scorpions. They fear the loss of their leaders, and they fear the loss of God's presence. They feared the loss of God's presence so much that while they were waiting for Moshe Rabbeinu, for Moses to come down from the mountain, they actually began to form an idol. That's how afraid they were. The golden calf. So coming out of that incident, God realizes just how afraid, just how anxious our ancestors were, and so as a result, God says, I have an idea. And several weeks ago we read these words, Asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham, build for me a sanctuary in the wilderness, that I may dwell among you. God doesn't say build a sanctuary that I should dwell in it. God says build a sanctuary that I may dwell among you, because God realizes we need a place to go in the midst of our anxiety to feel God's presence. And as it says in our Torah portion this week, Parashat P'kudei, the completion of the tabernacle happens. We celebrate the completion of that portable sanctuary in the wilderness. And the book of Exodus comes to a close by God telling Moses, and thus all of our ancestors, that we can feel God's presence there in that sanctuary. We can feel sanctuary from our fears and from our worries. And God says, even when you're traveling and you have to take down that tabernacle, you'll feel my presence, because I will lead you, a cloud of glory by day and a pillar of fire by night. And that's how you'll know, despite your fears, as you go forth from here, that I'm with you. Now it's interesting. If you ask psychologists today, and I'm not a psychologist, I don't even play one on television, but when you ask a psychologist, what are some of the best ways to deal with fear and anxiety? They'll tell you a couple things. They'll tell you many things. But they'll tell you one way is to go to your happy place, to find sanctuary. And the other thing they'll tell you, confront that fear or that anxiety head on. Immerse yourself in it. And thereby you'll begin to conquer your fears. Now we Jews today, we know what this means. Because here we are in the midst of sanctuary. With all of our fears and anxieties that exist within us as Americans and as Jews, we know that whether we come for daily minyan or we come on Shabbat, we find sanctuary. And here we are today, we get to celebrate with Aria and with her family. Not only do we feel sanctuary, but we have the joy. And because Joanna and John were kind enough to raise their kids in our congregation, their joy is our joy. And here they are sharing that joy with us. Now, the Dwoskin and Sermon families, they know from sadness and tragedy. So they know that much more how important it is to celebrate joy with community, to give thanks for the blessings that are in our lives, and to share that with community. We find sanctuary today here, and we find joy celebrating with Aria and with her family, celebrating with the community. And in a little while, we'll continue our joy with music, with song, and with food, because we can check all those anxieties and those worries at the door, and we can come in, and here we can feel safe and secure. But we can't stay here. The cleaning crew will come in eventually. Eventually we go out into the world. And what then do we do? What then do we do in the midst of our fear and anxiety out in the world? The story is told of a chassid who came to his Rebbe. And he said, Rebbe, I need you to talk to God. You have a special relationship with God. I need you to pray to God on my behalf, that I should fulfill all the mitzvot, the ethical mitzvot, the ethical commandments, the ritual commandments. Rebbe, I need you to pray to God on my behalf. So sure enough, with the chassid watching, the Rebbe closes his eyes. And he goes into the deepest prayer possible. Just one of those prayerful moments where everything is shut out and the Rebbe's fully in prayer. A moment passes, the Rebbe opens his eyes. And he says, I've spoken to God, I prayed to God on your behalf. And God says, indeed, he agrees that you should fulfill all the mitzvot, the ethical and the ritual commandments. And now God says, it's your turn. Go out and do them. We have to partner with God. We don't just stay within our sanctuary. We don't just stay in our happy places. We don't just hide from our anxiety and fears. We go out and we address them. When we see homophobia, we speak out against it. When we see misogyny, we speak out against it. When we see those who are in need, we act on their behalf. We help provide for them. When we see somebody criticizing the state of Israel and using it as a cover for anti-Semitism, we stand up and we speak out. We go to AIPAC, we go to Israel, we go to Washington, D.C., we call our congressmen and our congresswomen, our senators, and we say, this is unacceptable. When we sense that fear and that anxiety, we do two things. We come to shul. We find sanctuary and we find joy. And then when Shabbos comes to an end, we go out. And we strive to make a difference in this world, to bring justice to this society, and to care for all those who are in need. On this Torah portion, this week of Parashat P'kudei, may God bless us with the wisdom to know when to come find sanctuary. And may God give us the strength to confront our fears and our anxieties by building a just society, by caring for those who are in need, and by standing up for our people and for the state of Israel. This Shabbat, I hope you'll join us in continuing to find sanctuary, peace, and joy. And beginning tonight and continuing into the week, I hope you'll join me and our congregation in standing up for justice, for peace, for those who are in need, and most of all, for our people and the state of Israel. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may this be God's will, and let us say together, Amen.